Welcome to Whiskey and Immigrants, a four-year society podcast. I'm Matt Hines. On this show, we'll attempt to break down the invisible walls that many of us tend to construct around the people and things that we're unfamiliar with. We will hear the personal story of immigrants, both documented and undocumented, how and why they came here, their struggles and their triumphs, their views on America, and much more. Regardless of their answers, we hope to give you a greater perspective on immigrants and immigration that goes beyond the talking points and the statistics. Show your support by hitting subscribe or visit us online at foryoursociety.com. On today's show,
Gregor Strakl, 36. Italy, Slovenia. Yeah, that's where I was born and raised. Yep.
Gregor, thank you very much for coming in here today.
You are most welcome. Thanks for the invite.
Absolutely. Well, I wanted to talk to you for this because you come from Slovenia, you live basically half of your life there, you immigrate to the United States, and you've made quite a success of yourself, you know? It's true. Now, as you had mentioned in the opening recording, you were born and raised in Talija, Slovenia. By the way, by the end of the show, my apologies, I will wind up calling Slovenia Sylvania or Slovenia or some nonsense.
Pennsylvania and Slovakia.
Pennsylvania.
Yeah, Pennsylvania.
See, that's me. I know nothing about Slovenia other than the general geography. I know that it's an Eastern European country, so at least I know it's not one of those shithole countries.
Yeah, I mean, obviously, yeah, I mean, people have over history, they've tried to argue it's central, I like to say it's between Austria and Italy. It's kind of Central Europe, but it does typically gets associated with Eastern Bloc, yeah.
Well, it's certainly a beautiful region of the world. Is Slovenia known for having a lot of natural beauty?
It used to be, or still is called by many, a hidden jewel of Europe. Mostly because it's the size of Rhode Island, but it's got the mountains, it's got part of the Alps, which a lot of people don't know. It also got a bit of an Adriatic, which although Croatia takes most, but there's enough coast for it to be beautiful. And it's one of the greenest countries in Europe as well, so there's a lot of natural beauties and resources.
Is that something that Slovenians take a lot of pride in and really appreciate?
Yeah, no, absolutely, 100%. There's a few national parks that are beautiful, and there's a couple of world-renowned, the Postojnska Jama, or Postojnska Cave, which is one of the largest underground caves in the world. They hold concerts down there. It's got Proteus. It's also called a human fish. It's one of the living fossils, basically, that only lives in that cave. It's got both gills and lungs, I guess, and it's a living fossil, which is pretty incredible. So there's a handful of things that are attributed uniquely to Slovenia.
And what type of government is there? What's the political structure like?
I think you'd call it a parliamentarian democracy at this point. But depending on who you ask or which generation of people you ask, they'll tell you that, what is it, it's like wolf in sheep's clothing. So people that used to be communists just changed, and now they sing to a different tune. So, but definitely, I mean, it's in the EU, it's got parliament. The trend's been definitely on the western side of things.
And how about cuisine? Is there anything that Slovenia is kind of known for? Any specialty foods?
I mean, there's a couple... and I am the worst cook in the world. I can make eggs and I can make tea. That's pretty much all I can do. So I'm probably the worst person to ask. We have a couple things that we're famous for. Žganci, that's one. It's basically, I'm trying to think of an English term. I don't even know.
What kind of dish is that?
It's I don't know. See if you could Google it. Polenta is also one of our solid foods. But Italians also take credit for that. So our cuisine is kind of interesting. So Slovenia was technically part of 4 different countries, right? Part of it was associated with Austria, part with Croatia, part with Italy, and a little bit of the whole Hungarian piece, right? So the Steiermark region, or what we call Steierska, it's got a lot of German influence. So there's a lot of strudel and sauerkraut and sausages, that's kind of there. But then you also have the coastal region, where there's a lot of fish and a lot of Italian type cuisine. But there's a couple things that are uniquely to us. So that's Žganci for sure. And that's, if you type it into Google, you say Zganci. I
am so relieved that you spelled that for me, because I'm I don't even know where to begin with this.
It looks really There's also kremšnita, which is ours. That's a dessert. And then I forget what it's called. It's in Prekmurje. They used to call it in English overmura, overcake, or something like that. But there's a handful of dishes that are unique to us.
It just looks like the type of food that smells good. For our listeners at home, it looks like it smells good.
For me, I am obviously heavily biased.
Right.
Living here, every time I go home, I'm sure it's, crappy. by the cuisine standards, but to me it just tastes like home. It's like those sounds and noises and stuff that you just remember when you go home and you're like, oh my God, I used to eat this all the time.
And it's good and it's familiar.
It's probably good because it's familiar. It's not because it's actually good. You know
That's
what I
okay.
mean? So
That's okay.
But
it's like Tim Allen or something. Familiar, but not that good.
yeah. Well, it depends who you make it, right?
Right.
Like, if my mom makes it, it'll still be the best ever, but doesn't mean my mom's the best cook.
Right? And what's your mom's first name?
Dragica.
Dragita?
Dragica.
Dragita.
Yeah.
I'm just going to butcher that. This is the wrong show for me. I can't pronounce
it's
foreign
totally
names.
fine.
So you say your mom's name is Dracula.
Yes. I get that too. No, I'm just kidding.
Was she excited when you moved to the United States? Is that something that she was on board with?
I think now she's excited. I think in the beginning was difficult. I had finished my first 2 years of college, and then I was supposed to go study in China.
Oh, really?
Because that was what my degree was. I was studying history in Chinese, or sinology, actually, which is study of Asian culture and thought through a language, which was Mandarin at the time. I finished my 2 years. I was supposed to go in China, fell in love, met an American, ended up here. So I think for first 4 or 5 years was super difficult because I was in this charted path and I had good grades, and had a governmental scholarship. I kind of squandered that away because I was young and in love, What's the song, Young, Dumb, and Broke? Is that what it is? So I kind of threw that away. So my mom and I went through a rough patch of about 4 years where we didn't talk simply because I had gone here. But I mean, overall, she was supportive. It was just, it was basically me, my younger sister, and, I was kind of the man of the family at the point. And so when I decided to leave, I've always had the innate ability to disconnect and just focus on what I'm doing and just go. So I think that was difficult, but overall, then we have a great relationship now. And,
Good.
But definitely had its rough patches over the years, you know what I mean? Just because you're not there,
I'd imagine it was difficult for both of you. What's her backstory? What type of work did she do? Where's Dad in all of this?
I like my dad was he was kind of an oddball. He did a little bit of everything, but most of the time I remember. I mean, I haven't grown up with him. I mean, he was an alcoholic and a bunch of other things.
Drink to that.
Oh yeah, well there you go. Hey, whisking up shows I'm not my dad,
Right?
No, so he was kind of in and out, but like basically he would do odd jobs. Like he worked in the theater as a light coordinator. Is that even a term? I don't even know. But like how in theaters when the play's going on, the different lighting technician. Yeah, maybe that's a better term. And then he'd drive cabs and like he was a handyman, like kind of a jack of all trades, but couldn't hold down a job, kind of that thing.
Yeah.
But it was also in and out. But my mom was always a hard worker. She was basically an executive assistant and like an office manager, that kind of role. Professional, but kind of working class.
And is your mom still in Slovenia? The family still in Slovenia?
Yeah, everybody's still in Slovenia. That's another question I get all the time. It's like, when's your family coming over? I'm like, they're not. And they're like, what do you mean?
Do they not want to?
No, I mean...
You don't want them to come?
Well, yeah, it's kind of that too. I'm like, listen, there's a reason I left. I mean, they're happy where they are, I mean, I think a lot of people have this image of like, everybody just wants to come over to get a great life. But that's not the point. I mean, Europe, if you look at quality of life indexes, States doesn't actually score that high. In fact, most European countries score way higher.
Way higher.
I mean, if Sweden wasn't so cold, I'd probably move there. Sweden, from what I know, is, super liberal, which is important to me. High standard of living, high education. But also I have first accounts, like one of my good friends, Zala, she teaches ballet out there. She's dating one of their scientists for space program. Little did I know Sweden has a space program.
Who knew?
But she lived out there for almost a decade now. So from firsthand accounts of hers...
And you've been here for, what, about 15 years or so? You came here when you were 20, 21, somewhere in that area, is that right?
Yeah, 2021, yeah. I left late 2002.
And at that time, how did Slovenians view America? What was the general impression of the United States? And what was your general impression of the United States before you came here?
Oh, man. Well, so, for me, it's very... I struggle talking about large trends because it's very, very interesting, right? Because you're encompassing a group of individuals. So you can talk about general trends, but you also have to be mindful of, that it's very individual and you're not lumping everybody in the same thing. But at the same time, in the States, you can talk about typical Republican values or typical liberal values, but knowing within those groups, there's obviously huge variances. Right. So, I mean, I'll just give you my subjective experience, and obviously if Slovenes listening to this, don't get upset. So, I mean, I think in the late 90s, early 2000s, the view of America was still, it was very good. Like, I mean, 70s and 80s, pretty much the idea was you come to the United States, you can make it, and that was very much alive in the 90s because a lot of people were watching and indoctrinated by TV show. Americans, Western Europe helped a lot during the Balkan War. So I think there was a lot of that. So me specifically, I learned English watching Fresh Prince of Bel-Air. I watched MASH. I watched Taxi.
Murphy Brown.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. 100%. And
you heard it's coming back, right?
Is it?
Next season.
Fresh Princes?
No, Murphy Brown.
Oh, Murphy Brown. Oh, I love Murphy Brown.
Man, Fresh Prince should come back, though. Uncle Phil passed, though. Hey, maybe you could be Uncle Phil.
I don't know if I could be Uncle Phil. I probably make a good Carlton. Mine is the dance skills. I don't know. But that's how I watched English. So I just had, and Baywatch, obviously, and Knight Rider and all those series, you know? And so I think I was already predisposed. I had a view of the States that was a little idealistic.
Sure.
I thought, you know, man, I just come here with a bunch of optimism and some hard work, and you can make people laugh, and that's all you do. And, you know, I mean, obviously that view has emerged over the years, but in its essence, it hasn't really changed. So.
And it's interesting that you say that you had this idealized version of America, because I'm starting to feel like every immigrant kind of does when they come here. They think the streets are paved with gold and they're going to be rich tomorrow.
Right.
Obviously, it's not.
Oh, no, I had my dream shattered as soon as I got here.
Really?
Yeah, 100%, yeah. I also got right into microcosm, and I spent my first 3 months in the Bay Area, right? So love Bay Area to this day, San Francisco, I think one of the most amazing, only trumped by New York. And then right after that, I went to Provo, Utah. Man, you know, and then in January 2003, we went to war, you know? I mean, we went to Iraq, and I just remember that was the first time where I was thinking like, oh, you know, and I remember at the time, I really struggled with that for a handful of things, because people are like, oh, it's the right thing to do, and we're doing democracy. And I'm like, dude, Iraq at the time, it's a cluster, right? Yeah. Like, it's hard to understand. You're just going over
the
there.
Sunni and the Shia.
At the time, Sunni, Shia, the Kurds. I mean, there's just a lot of things that have happened, a lot of local regional influences. That's why they still haven't solved, you know, the Middle East crisis in Israel and everywhere else. Like, because it's just a complicated thing that's not easy to understand. You can just go, you know, in there. And I remember with the ease people were talking about going at it. And mind
very
you,
casual.
Yeah, very casual. And I was like, I lived through like 7 days of war in the 90s in the Balkans, right? Slovenia had like 7 days of war. But we had a weekend house down in Croatia, which we lost ultimately. Well, my family did, not us specifically, right? But basically, when the war happens, it's you're not going to the mall and then having dinner.
Right. In this country, we don't really know what it's like to experience war. We just go to war in faraway places. And most of us, unless you have a loved one who's serving, kind of forget that they're even happening. That
was the first time when I was really starting to realize that there's a lot more to the States. And even though you can talk about it cohesively as a whole, each state varies. And then there's the East, the West Coast, the Central, the Bible Belt, the Rust Belt. Like
big cities, small towns.
Yeah, big city, small town. It's just like I realized that there's a lot more to the United States and a lot more dynamic. And then also, I went to BYU, right? And so it's a fairly religious university. And
are they now?
Yeah, no, exactly. And I remember being in class and people were like, oh, I prayed and I know we should be in Iraq. I remember that I had some real struggles. It was just like I was just observing as an outsider, you know?
Well, and you know, you came here at such a weird chapter in our story, shortly after 9/11, shortly before the Iraq War. And it seems like since you've been here, basically, the country's been different than the one I've always recognized.
Exactly.
A lot of division, a lot of ugliness. And that's all terrible, of course, but it's got to be kind of interesting to see it from an outside perspective to some degree.
Yeah, I mean, it's hard. It's kind of interesting to see. Like, I think, you know, 9/11 was definitely a very unifying factor, right? I think arguably it's the most unified Americans have been in terms, if you look at America as a melting pot of different backgrounds and different, you know, the European heritage or African heritage, you know, whatever it is, I think they were the most unified, right? Mm-hmm. And then since then, it's kind of that unity has been lost, I think, and now more so than ever, it's divided. It's kind of interesting.
Squandered, maybe more than anything.
Yeah. I mean, you know, but
by leadership.
But I think in tragedies, people come together.
Sure,
you know?
Absolutely.
But I mean, I saw a different kind of unification though under the Obama year. I remember I was living in San Francisco, and I remember, you know, we had the election parties, and so I think in many respects there's a lot of movement forward, and I think
God, what a crazy time to join a country.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, it's been an interesting 15 years. Yeah.
And you had mentioned that initially you were supposed to study in China through a Mandarin program. Do you speak Mandarin Chinese?
Well, I used to. Let's put it that way, right? So I would study Mandarin and then also simplified and traditional characters along with Pinyin. So yeah, I mastered up to like 3,000, you know, characters. So I spoke pretty fluently, but I've lived here for 15 years. When I was in San Francisco, I actually, you know, kind of re-engaged with it, and a lot of employees I had at the time in my corporate career were of Mandarin descent, or sorry, not Mandarin descent, but they were Chinese descent, speaking Mandarin. And so I was pretty fluent, Now it's kind of, I say I speak 5.5. So my Mandarin still, I could get by, but I wouldn't say it's anywhere near my English levels. But it's on my plan to go back and visit and spend some time there to get it to at least colloquial standards. You know what I mean? So,
well, that's impressive. You know, I admire anybody who takes it upon themselves to learn a foreign language, let alone several. Did you learn those languages, especially English, while still at school in Slovenia?
So I studied German and English in school pretty much. Picked up Croatian just because my brother and I were spending most of the time during the summers in Croatia. But actually our dad's side of the family is from Austria, have Austrian ties. And so every summer when we were there, Uncle Willy and like some of his cousins, our grandfather's cousins would come, they would speak German. So there was always like a little bit of that like German influence. Croatian and Serbian, or Serbo-Croatian at the time, it was the official language of Yugoslavia. So you kind of did that. And then Mandarin is just something I wanted to do from having watched Jackie Chan movies and Bruce Lee movies since I was 5-6 years old. And then in school, I don't remember specifically now, but like usually in 5th grade, you start studying English. I think that's younger now.
And that's mandatory in Slovenia schools?
Yeah, that's mandatory. It's just part of school. Then you have it in high school. So usually by the time you graduate high school, you will have had some of them I'm sure will correct me, but basically anywhere between 6 and 8 years of English and 4 years in high school of a second language, which would then be either German or Italian, depending on what part of the region you're from. And I'm sure there's some elective languages now too. But
cool. You know, I think it's great that the Slovenian schools, and I imagine most European schools, place such emphasis on foreign language. And I think it's great that it's something that you took full advantage of. That's served you well.
I'm a dork. I'm a huge geek. And so I love languages. I like puns.
You do like puns.
I do. In my opinion, they're the best, you know? And so, no, but it's just funny because I get so much crap now, you know, either for dad jokes or cheesy jokes. So I'm like, how could they be dad jokes if I have no children? You know, it's just not, or no children I know of.
That in and of itself sounds like a dad joke.
I know, right? I'm like, oh my gosh, maybe that's why I don't have kids. They don't want to be born. I don't know.
Well, and I'm betting that you being the way you are is a byproduct, at least to some extent, of your love of American pop culture.
Oh, 100%.
Comedies, things like that. You sort of realize at a certain point that humor's a good way to connect.
But I also love, like, you know how people have photographic memories? I really don't, but like if you play any of the old school episodes like Fresh Prince of Bel-Air, all that kind of stuff, I used to tape the subtitles, right, over. So, and I'd listen and listen and listen. I'm just fascinated with words. Or like etymology, super interesting to me. The study of history of words or how they emerged over time. And it's just something that fascinates me. I don't know why. I'm wired. Like, it certainly doesn't make me popular, but I just think it's badass to bring it around. Yeah, I don't know.
Language is fascinating. You know, it really is. It can educate a people, start or stop wars, define borders. For some people, it's how they decide if they like someone else or not, if they're a good person or not, if they're on the right team or not. It's powerful stuff.
I remember being like 10-year-old kid, like on the beach in Croatia. You know, my brother and I were playing in the pools, and there were like these Italians that would always come over, and like we couldn't speak. And I just remember thinking, like, damn it, how many people must there be who have a lot to say, but I don't understand their language and they don't understand mine, so I'll never be able.
Right.
And then when I was in high school, I'm like, I'm certainly not a popular kid, so I better expand my options to learn as many languages. But like, I just remember that thought always being with me. And, you know, like, I don't know, sometimes, you know how, like, you've dated a lot, I guess. I mean, I haven't, but I assume, right? That's why. So
I get around.
Like, yeah, you get around. Is that... No, but like, you know, sometimes you're speaking the same language, but, you know, people go like, oh, why'd you break up? Communication. Well, you guys speak the same language. How could communication be an issue, right? So now you add complexity of languages and culture and all this stuff. And language is just such a fascinating medium.
And you can speak the same language as somebody else, but
and be miles apart, and vice versa, right? And so to me, that's just so fascinating. And people don't spend a lot of time thinking about it, you know? And not that they should. I'm no authority or anything. But I just find it fascinating. Yeah. It's very interesting.
Yeah, no, right there with you. Well, sticking with language for just a moment here. Have you had any of those moments since coming to the U.S. with all of our slang, homonyms, things like that? Has it ever just tripped you up to the point of embarrassment or causing a problem that could have been avoided?
I have definitely said some things that I probably shouldn't have had said. I'm trying to think. There was like 1 or 2 moments that used to stick out, but it's been so long, and I repressed those memories, you know, obviously.
Right.
No, But there was like a handful of things, right? I was always fascinated by idioms as well, right? Because Slovenia has, like Slovene has a whole bunch of funny ones that when you try to translate directly just doesn't work, which you should never do translate directly.
I want an example when you're done with this.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Just give you a few, like I used to think, you know how people say you're ahead of the curve, right? Well, I used to think it's ahead of the curb. And then also the other one was nip it in the bud, right? I used to think it's nip it in the butt. And that was like up to like a couple of years ago.
A lot of people.
I was
still
like, oh,
think
that makes sense. Like you nip it early, so because if it hits your butt, it doesn't spread elsewhere, right? So I was like, all right, that makes sense. But that would be one. The other one, so here's the thing. So like as a Slovene, we mix E's and I's. So like E here is read as E, and then I is read as E. So I is literally E. So like some of the words that if I get passionate or mad or, intoxicated slightly or whatever, right? I'll start mixing up the words that have those two sounds. So a bitch will become a beach and a beach will become a bitch. And it's just like those I have to watch. Because I'll be like, oh yeah, I was on a bitch. And I was like, oh wait, that's not what I meant. I was on a beach.
Spent all day on the bitch.
Yeah, exactly. And so I think there's been definitely a few moments.
We haven't talked about it, but you do grappling, wrestling, jiu-jitsu, mixed martial arts, not my wheelhouse, and you found some success at it. So I want to talk to you about that, but in the context of traveling all over the world, meeting people from all different kind of walks of life, because as somebody who's cultured and intellectually curious, I feel like that's something you probably appreciate quite a bit.
Oh man, it's great, guy. I retired last year, June. Took a year off, traveled the world, and did jiu-jitsu and grappling, and that was just part of my goal. In my 20s, I never really, people were like, oh, you should do it, but I was just like, yeah, work this, that. And I was like, hey, let me see what I could do with it, But it took me all across the world. But I think one of the coolest experiences was being on Team USA for UWW, which is United Wrestling World, and Worlds in Azerbaijan. And over there, American team and Iranian team, right, were next to each other on the stands. You're waiting all day for you to come up and your turn and all that. And man, I remember going against a guy who was one of my teammates at 205 got injured, blew out his knee or something similar. Carlos Soto, super nice guy. So I stepped in to compete at 205. So it was Iranian, and he ended up on that team. So we competed against each other. I got my ass kicked like hard by him. And I took fifth in that. He later won. And anyway, so like super hard match. Politically and country-wise diametrically opposed, right? But man, we were laughing. We fought hard, but then we laughed. It's just like that's what wrestling does. It removes all barriers, all obstacles. It makes you realize that guy's got 2 arms, 2 legs, ugly ass ears, cauliflower ears that we all have, right? But at the same time, we do the same thing, right. And we're both there doing the same thing. We're more alike than we are different.
Oh, for sure.
And I just remember, like, after 2 days, or even after first day, we were all good. Like there was no. The only issue we remember having is our American team. The female team. They would change. And so they would take off the shirt, and so they have bras. Which clearly, is.
You didn't.
Well, no. I like to keep my bra private, right? No. It's just it's offensive, right? Culture, right? So Iranians. So that was the only thing they talked to us about, but it wasn't like, whoa.
Oh, you speak Iranian
somehow
too.
People are wired to notice differences.
Why is it? Do you think that we, and some more than others, are so quick to build these walls around ourselves?
We do because we're creatures of habit, man.
Right.
That's the problem with people, And then also, anything that's new is uncomfortable, I think. And whenever things are uncomfortable, like if you notice how people are wired, people will literally freak out if their routine, think about it. When you wake up, you put your this way, you have your routine. You sit in the car, you drive to Starbucks. So if anything changes, if there's like road construction, or if your Starbucks isn't available, or if someone moved your car seat, it's like it automatically throws you off your game.
Get you pissed.
Oh,
get
you
something tiny.
People were like, and it's super tiny in the grand scheme of things, but that's how we're wired. Yeah. And again, when I say this, that doesn't mean I'm above it.
Right.
It happens. And so then, because people are creatures of habit, and anything that's different, we want to seclude, we want to arm ourselves with people that are like-minded.
And you're kind of the opposite. I know you like to travel, you like to go to new places, meet new people, try new things. Where have you been? What are your favorite places?
I spent quite a significant time in Australia and like some of the other parts of the world. Like Southeast Asia fascinates me a lot. Asian history is very fascinating.
How many countries have you been to?
Man, like it's hard to say right now. I think it's 52.
Wow.
I want to say, but like it'll be. I'd have to double check. Yeah.
Even if it's just somewhere in that ballpark.
Yeah, I mean it's definitely. I mean think about all of Europe, States, Mexico. Yeah, definitely in the 40s.
See, that's really amazing. Because if your American dream success story, you're able to travel and see the world. That's pretty incredible.
Oh, I don't know what you said. What are you talking about? You're too kind.
That's amazing to me because most people, that's their dream, is just to one day travel somewhere.
Right.
Just once. And you've traveled all over the world.
I mean, yeah, I think travel is the best thing you can do.
Has it been like mind expanding for you?
Oh, it's the best education. In fact, so I wouldn't say don't go to college, but I think college is important, but I don't think it's the end all be all. Like, I don't think you have to go to college, right? In fact, I know a lot of people that never went, they're super successful. But all of them have a thirst for knowledge. Or there's not a better fact gathering sort of education than travel, man. There just isn't. Now, with that, I don't mean you're like, I'm going to Mexico and you stay at a 4-star resort. Cater to Americans and everybody speaks English. I don't think that's it. You got to spend time with the locals, you get Airbnb, meet friends, or have friends introduce you to friends. Like martial arts has been such a great medium for me because every country I go to, there's other people that practice the same art. So I'd stay with them, I meet their families, meet their friends, see how the locals live. And I'm fascinated with why people do the way they do things, why boundaries are the way they are, both socioeconomic, political, all those boundaries. And so it's just dialogue.
Seems like that's kind of our problem right now, right? Is a lack of just genuine dialogue with one another.
It's a lack of intellectual discourse. And the way you see this is, for example, in people sharing their Facebook posts, they'll be like, oh, so-and-so ate lemon or did this and survived cancer, right? Now, if you look at typical medical studies, right, there's always an anomaly. Out of 1,000 people, one always survives. But people want to cling on to this, and then what's happening
because
now,
it fits their need,
because it fits their narrative
true.
Or view or whatever. But 999 people didn't do that. You have freak car accidents where someone goes 100 miles an hour and they survive the crash without a scratch. And that's me saying, no, so-and-so survived the crash, so you should never drive with a seatbelt, you should never do that. So what's happening then is people are making these decisions, and the best one was, I think Carmen Electra, or was it someone that came out with the whole, don't vaccinate my baby?
Oh,
right?
Jenny McCarthy.
Oh, was it? Okay, yeah, one of the Playboy, whatever. And now you have cases that have been eradicated. Polio coming back, and it's like
the plague. They're finding new cases of the plague, like New Mexico or whatever. For Christ's sake, people, vaccinate your kids.
Right. It's just like, it's that, right? But I remember, I think David Chappelle, I'm a huge fan of stand-up comedy, right?
Love
Dave
Chappelle.
Chappelle did like an interesting skit. He's like, Ja Rule, what do you think about 9/11, right? And he literally goes like, what the fuck are we asking Ja Rule what he thinks about 9/11, right? And it's like who is Ja Rule?
He's
not
against
qualified
it,
to talk about it, right? So the other day I saw a meme, and I'm not a big fan of memes because obviously oversimplification leads to Iraq and some of the other. Most things in life are complex. But like someone said, like Homo sapiens ate organic food, gazed at the stars, wasn't vaccinated, wasn't this, wasn't that, and then it says died age 29.
Exactly. Well, and it does quickly bring up a really interesting point, kind of circling back before to what you were talking about martial arts and playing Iran, and how something that is basically fighting can actually be a unifying force, whereas something like Facebook, the internet, which is supposed to make our world smaller and expand knowledge, sort of becomes this weapon of division.
It is interesting, right? And that's because the information is filtered and it's not for you to experience, right? And so that's the issue. Something universal like grappling or sports even in general, I feel like this more applies to individualistic sports because team sports, while they build camaraderie, I feel like they also like build the national pride and some of the other things like you see around soccer. So, but again, I would say soccer generally by and large unifies people, minus British soccer fans sometimes.
Have you been watching the World Cup?
I am. But no. I mean, I think everybody where you realize how much work and dedication goes into something like that, you cannot but have respect for that person. That's why I think there's universal things like meal sharing, drink sharing. Every major culture has like drinking songs and things like that, right? Unifying experience, that transcend humanity, I think are super important, and people need to expose themselves to that. So yeah, the information is readily available, but it comes down to dumbification. The worst thing to look at is Discovery Channel. I remember looking at it in the 2000s. It was like I would
see actual information.
Yeah, but I'd learn about things. Now it's like, what's the Greek guy with the weird looking hair?
One of the like ancient alien guys?
Yeah. And he made it sound like it's an actual science. Could it be possible that the ancient, so like that's like the Occam's razor, right? It's like the simpler the explanation, the more it fits the narrative. So they're doing the opposite. They're like, well, if we can't explain it, it must be some alien. Like, and it's just like, how is this on the Discovery Channel? And then you watch like some of these like things that are happening, like Flat Earth Society. And that was another one where it's like, we have members all around the globe. I'm like, you realize the idiocracy of your statement, right? And that's been proven in 1600s. You can watch a ship, and as it passes the horizon, it goes down.
It's literally astonishing. Well, and then these same people who think they're experts then turn around and demonize true experts like Bill Nye the Science Guy or Neil deGrasse Tyson. Like, oh, they're shills.
Oh, yeah. Oh,
for
and
science.
If anything doesn't fit, then it always goes back to, oh, they're working for the man, or
Exactly.
they're working for the org.
Exactly.
And don't get me wrong, I'm sure there's a component of that, right?
Sure.
I do have,
Sometimes,
I have a couple
absolutely.
of my own conspiracy theories, but there are literally people that believe that. And you have like whole documentaries on YouTube and like.
Oh, I know. I watched one of those Flat Earth documentaries, and it's like 2 hours of my life I wish I could take back, but I had to know. We're definitely veering a little off topic here, but you mentioned you have some conspiracy theories. What's your big conspiracy theory?
A conspiracy theory of my own is, I don't think it's a conspiracy theory. It's just, I think it's how the system's wired.
Let's just call it a theory.
But let's call it that, according to the ancient. But the way things are designed, right? You get a raise, you buy a bigger car, and it's also part of the human condition. That's why I don't think it's a conspiracy theory. But I think the way the system is rigged is it wants to keep you in a predictable sort of pattern for you to make your income, take your yearly vacation, do the whole thing, retire at 65, leave 10, 15, 20 years, whatever.
Right.
And then die. That's it, right? And so once I realized that it's how the system's not rigged, it's just how it works.
Well, and
right?
it just logically makes sense. That's what we've been conditioned for, basically.
Just because that's the system, it doesn't mean I have to accept it.
Right. Nobody really has to live within those confines.
I don't have to live with those confines. Why every time I'd get a raise, I'd buy a different car or a bigger house? What if that doesn't make me happy? But a lot of people think it makes them happy,
Right.
and to some, it legitimately does. And for me, it just doesn't. So I had to answer what makes me happy. And I got to answer that in my late 20s, and then I got to work towards it in my early 30s. And
Well, so let's talk about that. Your 20s and coming to America on a student visa and then becoming a citizen. Kind of explain that whole process to us if you can.
so basically, yeah. So I came in on a student visa. The girl I fell in love with, we dated. We got, married later, and then, obviously it didn't work out, and so we got divorced. So
that
I
made
became a
you-
permanent resident, and then, people are like, when are you going to become an American? I didn't really want to become an American, because I was born in Europe. I'm raised European. I'm like, my family's all there. And then we got divorced in like 2006 or 2007. 2006, sorry, I'm lying. It took 6 months to be legal, so it was Christmas Day 2006.
Well, Merry Christmas.
And and so then I didn't take it until last year, and it was simply more of a matter of the fact that I've lived here for 15 years now, and that I'll be here. I mean, Europe will always be an important part, and it'll probably be half and half type thing. I'm more of an American now than I'm a European, I guess.
I was just going to say, which do you consider your home? Or if you had to identify yourself, would you say you're Slovenian or you're an American?
Man, I'd say European.
European.
Yeah.
Go more
Not
broad.
even Slovenian. Like, it's technically it's a continent, right? And I think people over 21 now, it's the first time where basically a third of Europeans see themselves as European first, then their nationality, right? So it's less about I'm German, I'm French, I'm this and that.
That's interesting.
It's kind of like, you say you're a Utahn or you're a Californian, but I mean, most people say I'm an American, right? So it's the same thing, but within Europe, you have borders and languages and things. So that national identity is still pretty strong. But for me, for all of us that are abroad, I think we all say we're European. Most of us, I would say. So no, I would still say I'm European because clearly, I'll always have an accent. I'll always be foreign to some.
Have you ever felt that when you're talking to people that they treat you differently because you have an accent?
It's kind of interesting, like depending on what group of people, right? Because when I worked at a call center early in my career, I had my accent was a lot thicker. I still have a noticeable accent, but it's because I kept it for the ladies. I'm just joking. No, but it was funny. I was working at a call center, right? And everybody at the time in like the early 2000s, mid 2000s, was like, "Are you in India?"
Geniuses. Wow.
Well, because at the time, the prevailing view was call center people are in India.
Yeah.
Then I was like, I do not even have an Indian
Right.
accent. Like, what does sound...
So just like any accent is an Indian accent to them.
Right. Oh, you're a call center, you're automatically, right?
Right.
But it's kind of interesting when I was living in the Bay Area, right? For example, people would be like, oh, it's easy for you, you're white. And that's an interesting study that I've learned. This was actually an interesting debate I learned from a friend of mine. The color of my skin is white, but my ethnicity is European. You're white, so to
How
speak.
dare you?
but our ethnicity is completely different. Right? You speak English, you were brought up here, I was brought up someplace else. So it's kind of interesting, right? Because ethnicity doesn't always follow the color of the skin. For example, let's just say I was adopted in China, like as a 3-month-old, right? So the color of the skin would be white, but my identity
would be Chinese.
Right?
Well, like, what have people said to you, or what have you experienced because of your obviously not from around these parts status?
I've gotten everything from they took our jobs to the South part, they took our job, to good stuff too. So
well, and like you said, the people in California say it's easier for you because you're white. Do you feel that way? Do you think the immigration process, the assimilation process, all of that has been easier because you're white, you're from Europe, as opposed if you came here from like Honduras or something? Do you feel like more doors have been open to you?
I think there's a double standard. Yeah, absolutely. 100%. Yeah. I think that's the reality. I think anybody that says different probably has rose-colored glasses on a little bit. I mean, I wouldn't say it was just paid and doors were just open, but it's definitely easier. Yeah.
Oh, you're white. Come on in.
Yeah. No. It's not. I don't think it quite goes like that, but yeah, definitely. I mean, and again, this is a super difficult topic. I don't really feel super comfortable talking about, but I mean, if people can't look at, some of the videos, right, like of people being arrested or shot or pulled over. I mean, I've been pulled over.
You were never worried you were going to get shot, right?
Correct.
I've never worried I was going to get shot.
Right. So, I mean, if people don't think there's a double standard, I think there absolutely is. There absolutely is. In fact, I have a lot of really close friends that I've been on a passenger seat when they were pulled over, and I think 100%.
Worried it's going to go sideways?
Not even that it was going to go sideways, but just that there's definitely some, let's just say profiling is alive and well. Let's put it that way, right? And stigmas are alive and well. Absolutely, 100%.
Definitely, yeah.
I mean, and again, you have to put things in a continuum, right? So I think racism is alive and well in general, but I think it's gotten camouflaged over the years. And I do think with the younger generations, it's a lot less present, right? Because that happens with exchange of ideas, as things mix. And then I think some of it is also overt.
God, and now especially, it seems.
And I don't think some of it is like, and again, like when I talked about like being pulled over and things like that, obviously you have to realize that, police get shot and get shot at. And so there's a lot of complexities. And so I hate to speak from an authoritarian perspective or anything like that. But I think a lot of it is also because people don't know what trust. Like I remember when my grandma, she was like super old, before I moved to the States, and she's like, just be careful, because Americans are weird. And I'm like, what do you mean? She's like, I watch Ricky Lake, right? And so, like, I don't think there's anybody out there that's going to be running around with pitchforks trying to, like, hurt people, right? I mean, there are definitely people like that.
Right.
And I think some of it is just because people don't know, right? I saw this in China, right? And there was, like, a group of us tourists. Chinese kids would run up, and they would touch, all of my friends who are of African-American origin because they have never seen a black person, right?
Yeah.
And they would touch their hair, or like similarly, like if you go to Africa, similar happens. So I think some of it is also like exposure, not knowing, because children arguably are not, well, they're not racist.
Right, yeah, you're not born that way.
Yeah, exactly. So it's just kind of interesting. So I think a lot of it is education, exposure, things like that, which is why I think wrestling and sports or anything that brings people together, food, exchange of ideas is important, so vital. So it's alive and well, but I think overall as a sort of society, I think we're moving in the right direction.
I think so, or I hope so, or I'd like to hope so.
Yeah, I mean that's what I would hope so. Even though, I think with the recent switches in
leadership,
well, that, or even with the election of our prior president, right? You could just see that there was definitely a part of the populace that wasn't so.
They were pretty upset.
Yeah, so I think for someone to say racism doesn't exist is just, I think, just blatantly ignorant. It just is. It's just part of our history. It's part of
It's reality.
It's just reality, right? I mean, we're moving in the right direction, which is good, but at the same time, it could always be expedited.
It most certainly could be, and I'm guessing that Slovenia's pretty damn white.
Yeah, pretty much. Yeah. I mean, I mean, there's just no way around it. Yeah, that's pretty much. Compared to like England or France or Germany or a lot, it's pretty much,
pretty homogenous.
Yeah.
Do they still have issues with race? Did you ever hear anybody speaking in a derogatory way about other races, even if that race isn't really present in the country?
I don't know. I mean, I think there's jokes and things like that exist, but like, and I think every language has that, every culture has that, but not like a blatant. I think there was a couple of incidents. There was one gentleman I think his heritage was African, and he got beat up in the street one time, and that was like a big national news. So there's definitely a component of that.
Was that when you still lived there?
Yeah. That was like I think it might have been late 90s, early 2000s. So, I mean, yeah, it definitely exists. But, like, within Europe, it's kind of interesting, or Slovenia in particular, there's a lot of national identities within there. Like, a few minorities of national origin there, which is like Croatia and like Serbia. And after the war, some of those were more prevalent. But I wouldn't say to the same extent as here. I think you saw the degree of European racism. And again, this is super hard to say, but like with the Syria and some of the refugee crisis, right? Some countries took them in, like Germany with under Merkel, right? And other countries like completely shut the border down and just, I think like here, everywhere else, prejudice and things exist in Europe as well. So.
Every place has their issues, I guess.
But I mean, immigration is just such a hard debate for all countries, right? Is it legal? Is it illegal?
It's like everybody wants to be somewhere that they're not. Particularly, and understandably, if you're in a war-torn region or a third world country, you could hardly blame somebody for wanting to get out of that.
Man, if you've ever been to a third world country, it's a hard life. If you've been to, I've done choice humanitarian before and things like that.
Choice humanitarian? What is that? Explain that to us.
Choice humanitarian is like, I basically went out and built roads or schools and slept in tents and helped locals get water and things like that. And that was at the southern tip of Mexico, in Irapuato and Guanajuato.
That's pretty incredible.
And it was some of the most eye-opening. We had to go get water to a river, take a burro or like a donkey down, and I mean it was a month and a half, something like that. I remember we were playing soccer with the kids, and I felt like my tennis shoes were pretty worn out, so I left them, and then the kids picked them up and they'd play soccer with them with us. Different person would wear them different day.
They're sharing and taking turns with the shoes. That's pretty cool. That says quite a lot about them.
And then the last day before we left, they threw a party for us, and it was this huge piñata. Man, when we busted it, peanuts came out. It wasn't candy, it wasn't anything. It was just peanut. And kids were, man, you should see like the excitement. Oh my gosh. I remember coming back to the U.S., and that must have been 2005 maybe. And I remember coming back, man, and I was just like, dude, we spent $5-10 on a meal. Over there it's like $1 a day or something. So I remember for months calculating how much is this and that, and I really struggled with that component, and that's why I think travel just opens up so many interesting perspectives
and just help gaining perspective on why certain populations may want to immigrate here to begin with. Not that we're preaching open borders, but understanding of why some people truly don't feel like they can stay in their home country.
And I agree, there's a component that there has to be laws, but then also not all laws are just. People would openly ask for labor from Mexico in a specific case, right? So it's not like, and again, these topics are all super complicated.
Sure. You don't have to have all the answers. You're just speaking from experience and from the context.
And the context they sort of, I've been exposed to them. So that's obviously my narrative. There's intricacies that I don't know and you don't know. And it's obviously complex and individualistic and all those things. And
so you went back home recently for a visit. You go back every few months.
Yeah.
When you go back to Slovenia, does it seem like it's changed? Does it feel different to you now that you've lived in the United States for so long? Or does it just feel like going home and that's nice?
No, man, it doesn't. It's changed. It's changed a lot. In fact, it started, I remember first time it started happening was maybe 4 years ago. I'd come home and I'd sit down at a restaurant and the waitress comes out and she starts talking to me in English. So I start speaking back Slovene. And she's like, oh, I thought you were an American. And I was like, what do you mean? And she's like, oh, you're loud and boy. And I was alone and I sat down. She's like, well, the way you carry yourself, you're an American. And I remember thinking that's interesting. But then maybe a year later or 2 years later, my friends started noticing, man, you're a lot more direct. I don't know, the energy, the vibe is just not European. And I was like, I almost took offense to that. But then, like I said, a year or two later, I'd go home and I'd start taking pictures. So, I'm seeing Slovenia increasingly, I wouldn't say a tourist lens, but almost this is where I grew up. Right. And it's pretty damn awesome.
You start to, appreciate it in different ways and see it through different eyes.
Yeah, so you start seeing it from a different perspective. I still consider it home. My sister has 2 kids, and every time I go back, I see them, and I spend time with them, drop them off at school, pick them up, all that good stuff. And that's becoming super important, obviously, but I have a feeling that the way I'm wired, and I was never a good fit even back then. I just don't think I could fit in.
That's an interesting point. The kind of changes in you, the Americanization of you that maybe you haven't even noticed, but others notice.
Yeah. Well, it's 15 years, right? Arguably, when you're 25, you're still not fully grown. Your brain doesn't develop till you're 24. And with some, it takes longer.
Now, I'm curious about this. When you travel back home, particularly these last 2 years or so, do the types of questions Slovenians ask you about America, have those types of questions changed with the new administration? Has the perception changed?
This is literally what I get. So what's up with Trump? Every time, it doesn't matter what it was. When it was W, it's the same thing, right? It's what's up with Bush? I'm not at the briefings. I don't know. You know what I mean?
Did you get that same sort of thing during the Obama years? maybe a more conservative element coming out in Slovenia?
No, I think Obama was universally liked. I mean, Obama's hard not to like. Like, you could disagree with him on policies, but I mean, he was just, I think, in an epitome of what a president should be, or I don't know, it's hard to say what a president should be. I'm just saying, like, he was hard to dislike because he engaged people. He was a colorful, he was funny, he was a family man, thoughtful, kind.
Intellectually curious.
Yeah, intellectually curious. You watch his discourse, you can disagree with him, but you cannot deny his intelligence and his poise and his eloquence. And so I think those things were universally liked across many different countries,
right.
Including, I mean, most people in Europe, I think.
It's interesting because I think he was probably always more popular outside of the United States than he was within the United States. And not because of anything he did necessarily, but just because the opposition here was so strong against him.
Yeah, I mean, I got to be better at following politics, man.
No,
I
you
gave
don't.
up on him a long time ago,
Just don't.
Yeah,
you'll have a stroke at 40. Just
Yeah, I base a lot of my decisions off of history, right? Because I believe human motivations don't really change over time that much. And if you really peel back the onion, so to speak, either it makes you cry or it opens up your eyes to something, And so I think ultimately it's all very kind of simple. So I just don't follow politics that much, man. I have my opinions, but
it's funny because on our website, the For Your Society website, under the political news section, the subheading is, "Why do you do this to yourself?"
I mean, it would be fascinating to meet with some of those people. To be a president of such a powerful nation must be such a mind F, because there's stuff they don't tell. Historically, we know they don't. Again, I base most of stuff off of history because that's verifiable. Everything else is just a conspiracy.
I really like your phraseology there.
So it's just like, it would be crazy to think what else happens in the background, right? But at the same time, like, if you're not previous to that, I learned that once I became an executive, I was like, holy mackerel, there's a whole different ball game I just entered into. And the organization I was in was, it was a legacy company, 100 plus years old. And so just a lot of senior management has been around the block for a long, long time. And I was on the younger side of things, 29, 30. And I just remember entering that world and I was like, wow, I don't know anything about that world.
Well, so let's talk about that, actually. You come to America, you're going to school. And remind me again, what did you major in at BYU? History. What did you want to do with that? And I'll circle back too, because you had said previously that you didn't really want to get your citizenship. So first off, when you came here initially, did you think you'd come short term and then go back? How did that work out? And then how did it ultimately work out for you?
Well, so basically what happened was before I was supposed to go to China, I fell in love with an American, met her in Europe, but we were in love and, so I was like, I'll just come here, right? So I came here for school, came on an F1 student visa, process of H1, B1, but then it changed over to marriage and all that. I became a permanent resident. I would never take citizenship because I was born elsewhere. I was European. Like, there's no...
Forgive my ignorance here, but to get American citizenship, do you have to revoke your Slovenian citizenship, or can you have dual citizenship?
You technically have to, and I'm sure there's some legal experts out there, but technically, legally, when you take American citizenship, you give up all other allegiances, principalities, whatever the oath goes, right? But if your country still treats you like a citizen because you were born there, you technically can be dual.
Gotcha.
So, for example, like America has what's called expatria, and it's either by blood or by birth. So, for example, if your parents are both American and you're born somewhere, like they were on vacation, you're born someplace else,
right.
You're American, you're by blood. But it's also by soil. So if you are, that's the anchor baby, right? So if you're born here, you're an American. So for example, because I was born in Slovenia, I'll always be a Slovenian citizen. In fact, Slovenia, I think, and again, I'm sure there's some legal expert out there, but basically Slovene citizens will get it down to the 4th generation. So there will be Slovene citizens that have moved to the United States in 1920s, whose kids' kids can still get it if they apply.
Huh, okay.
That's basically how it works.
Well, that answers that. But now I've forgotten what the second half of the question was. Your professional path from when you first got here to now, how did you get to the level that you did at such a young age? Tell us that story.
So when I got here, right, I was like, I had super good grades back home. I had a scholarship. I had all this stuff. I came here and I was looking for a job. And I was just like, as a full-time student at the time, applied to be a cashier at the food court.
At the university?
At the university. And I didn't get it. And the reason they quoted was the lack of relevant experience.
It's really kind of the classic tell. You immigrate to the United States, can't even get a job as a cashier. Fast forward, 10, 15 years later, you're a very successful executive in the corporate world.
Yeah, I mean, I have like a handful of defining moments. That was one of them. I remember that really bothered me. No one really cares what I can do I don't even have a chance. But then I didn't disengage. I was like, okay, so how do I get a chance? I remember the other biggest piece of advice I got, this would probably be an HR failure now, but I was like a top performer. I worked at a call center.
This is the first like real job you got.
The first real job I finally got was a sales call center in Provo. And I remember after 6 months, it was outbound sales. Because I realized like, wait, I can be dialing East Coast and doing my homework. And I was like, and I'm making money for this? This is great. But basically after like 4 or 5 months, I was the only person left. So I was like, man, I'm bound to make a supervisor, right? And I remember like I interviewed like 17 times. And I failed every single interview, never got the job. And I was like, how is this possible? And my boss at the time pulled me aside and he told me, you're not American enough.
Whoa.
And I just remember, man, that sucked. Like, that sucked. Hearing that, like...
You're not American enough.
And it wasn't like you're not American enough. It's just the stuff I was saying was just not... the stats were there. Everything was there. And I remember being asked, why should I get the position? And I was like, well, like we have 3, leads that are women. So I feel like, like as a male, I could contribute certain things.
Oh, man. You just wanted to mix it up a little bit.
Yeah, mix it up a little bit, right? And that's just not what is acceptable. But that was my answer. That's what he meant by I'm not American enough. And he told me, like, listen, boom, 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 boom. And do you know what would happen otherwise? Everybody would just tiptoe around it because you can't, as a manager, say you're not American enough.
Did that piss you off at the time?
No, he didn't piss me off. I understood because he didn't just say, you're not American enough and left. Like he told me, but he took the time to break down what he meant. Oh, wait, you should know your audience, which is the most important lesson you should ever learn. So like the biggest piece I could give people like to advance their careers, et cetera, is know your audience, but know also how things connect.
So how'd you go from that job to the legacy company to the position you're in now, or the position you were in, rather, because you're not there anymore, obviously. What were those steps? Fill in those blanks for us.
So after college, I graduated, like a legacy insurance company picked me up, started as an entry level there, worked my way up, became, one of the youngest. The title would be like vice president, which is basically...
You're not the janitor.
Yeah. And so, I mean, I think... but the legacy company picked me up after college. So basically, by then I already knew, like, okay, who's my audience? I could also try to imagine... What does my boss want to hear? Because the higher you go, the elevator speech becomes more important because you have a short span. I just remember always asking my boss, what's important to them? What are your priorities? So ask more questions than you do talking. So then I would tailor my answers to their needs. And I think that's where the biggest disconnect is for people is I don't care what you do. Most jobs, most everything is still done by, with, and for the people. And what I notice is the higher you go in the company, the more it becomes about how many people can you take with you.
Sure, just leadership.
And that's like a leadership of servitude, right? I, as a leader, am genuinely trying to improve the quality of life, work balance, income, whatever it's important to my team.
Right.
And that just comes down to clear, honest communication. As long as you can communicate the vision down so that people can connect the dots and how what they do fits within what you do, within what the company does. And if those things are aligned and backed up by compensation, career advancement, and culture, that's another big important, which leadership comes into play, right? So that's why it becomes how many people can you take with you?
Sure.
So for me, the biggest piece is whatever, doesn't matter what team I lead, but if I lead it with authenticity, passion, and fair treatment, and try to create an environment where everybody can have a career if they can, or can meaningfully provide for the family or the lifestyle they think they deserve, I've pretty much won.
And so have the employees under that type of model.
So I think those were like the most important lessons. And then once I reached a certain level, I had a chance at my old job to really take all the lessons I've had and build something from scratch to full completion. And I realized, that's pretty much really what I wanted to do. Yeah. It was like, you can't do something. Now you did it from scratch to fully built out. And I was like, there's not really much more I can do. And then I feel like once you reach C-suite and above, it becomes really more about, I wouldn't necessarily say politics, but you have a group of highly talented individuals and most of them are type A personalities. So it becomes more about like positioning and maneuvering and all those things that I'm really not interested in as a martial artist, as a person that likes to get involved in things that's hands-on.
So you leave that company to retire. And then what happened on the way to retirement? You stumbled into a new startup.
Yeah. I took that on because, again, I believe in body, mind, and spirit. But after a year of traveling and doing martial arts, it was cool. But I was like, wow, that would be really cool. So now I'm working with the CEO that used to work with likes of Jobs and some of these guys. And man, like I'm talking to these like coders and engineers and Stanford grads half the time. It's like stuff is over my head. But at the same time, my mind is growing, my mind's expanding. I feel like I'm finally addressing that big hole that I had, which is I've never really been good at innovative thinking, right? Because if you think about it, every once in a while there is a disruptor, like
Absolutely.
iPhone or like Uber wasn't around 6 years ago.
Yeah.
Well, someone had to think about that. Now, I'm not that type of person. I probably will never be, but doesn't mean that I should shy away from that and not expose myself, which is why I'm super grateful, because this is like
kind of bringing you full circle.
Bringing me full circle. So I have legacy, mature organization. Now I'm like a startup that's a Series B, working for Series C, which is super cool. And it's a completely different world. It's basically Silicon Valley.
Did you think when you left Slovenia or when you decided to stay here in the States that you would find such success, kind of achieve that American dream, the financial stability and corporate success?
That was never really in my cards, man. Like, I never really thought about that. I never considered myself poor. Riches were never important. And I'm not rich, right?
Well, you've worked really hard and you're comfortable as a result of that. And that's, I think, what most people really want. Not to be rich, but to be comfortable.
Yeah, I think that was a byproduct, though. I will say that there was a component in the beginning, it kind of fits into that not belonging, fits into that you can't get a job in the beginning. There was like my 20s were spent proving that I can. Then I just there was this whole sideshow. For my whole 30s, I basically started doing martial arts seriously and then competed. And
you found success there as well.
And I found success, yeah. And, later I was Team USA, which, again, I'm not the world's greatest grappler or anything like that. But
well, I mean, no, that's cool. And you never would have been on Team USA had you not come to the United States to represent us. So back home, though, in Slovenia, big or small, what would you say you miss the absolute most?
I think food would be the major one, and then the pace of life.
Just more laid back?
More laid back, too laid back, but laid back enough. Like, I think increasingly as I get old, I'm realizing that this whole, that like a lot of corporate culture, a lot of American, it just has it wrong, man. We eat fast, we drink fast, so I think just the pace of life. I just think they have a better balance, That's why I think Australia is the best country in the world. I really do. I think they married the best thing, like best part of like Europe, best part of the States, and have work-life balance and a high standard of living.
And they're isolated. All right, you sold me on Australia. Just thinking about your life here in America, all of the experiences that you've had, work, life, the ups, the downs, real life. What do you think your life would be like today, right now, in Slovenia, had you never left? If you just stayed there, how do you think it'd be different from your life in America? What do you think you'd be doing?
I would be living in Asia.
So you still would have left the country?
No, yeah, I would have gone, and I was studied Chinese. That's something I always wanted to do. I always wanted to do martial arts and starring Jackie Chan or Bruce Lee movies. And I always wanted to go to Shaolin Monastery, so I'll still do that too.
That'd be a hell of an experience.
Yeah, no, I just want to go there for a few months, and so I'm going to do that probably next year. It would be somewhere in Asia, or I might be back in Europe, business type thing. Yeah, for sure.
Did you ever regret coming here?
I think... Because listen, you're changing language. I remember the most difficult probably was October 1st, 2002. It was just the night before I had to leave. Because you have to realize you're still 20. And then you have to pack your life in 2 suitcases and go someplace else, abroad, across the ocean. So that was difficult, especially my sister wrote me a really, personal letter and all that. And it was just difficult. I remember that last night crying. I couldn't fall asleep, couldn't do anything. And then I went to the airport. But at first, everything's new. Everything's like, you have the star eyes, whatever. But then you start missing language. You start missing family. So I think 2 years in, you get this depression period. And I've talked to a lot of international students who didn't talk about it, but experienced it. And so then a lot of them go back. And I just think once you make it past that, then you kind of find your identity, and then you kind of marry the best of both worlds, which is where I am in.
All right, final question, and it's a pretty open-ended one. Any just final thoughts about immigrants, about immigration, anything at all that you'd like to convey to folks before we let you get out of here?
I mean, I think we should not forget that the United States, much like other nations, is a nation of immigrants. However you want to slice it and dice it, right? And so I think still as a modern day experiment, I think United States, again, it's easy to forget that it is the power of immigrants that makes this nation so strong. And it is, United States still carries a big clout and cultural and sociological, a lot of different influences came from the United States, whether it's involving music or TV or popular media or genre or travel, like all of these things. And that comes in large part because of immigrants, because as a modern experiment, this is as closest to perfection as we got. That said, though, we should not forget the treatment of Native Americans, the treatment of Japanese, the treatment of blacks, the treatment of women. I mean, I think I understand American nationalism from the fact that how do you create a nation where languages, backgrounds, cultures are different, right? You create it around the flag, you create it around American way of life, you create it around that. Because you don't have the same language, you don't have the same experiences. So a lot of Europeans will be like, oh, Americans are so, because that's how you create a nation.
Huh. Gregor, that is a crazy, interesting perspective.
Because in Europe, you have shared history, you have shared food, you have shared language.
Right.
What do indentured servant from Britain and a Polish immigrant and then later a Mexican immigrant and an African American have in common? Arguably nothing. But so you create it. That's why Pledge of Allegiance. That's why the flag. That's why whatever. Remember that everybody had to start somewhere. Even the staunchest, even their parents or great parents or whatever. They also, too, were an immigrant at some point. I just think that, I think diversity makes us stronger than weaker. And so I think if you can put that lens on, you can appreciate a lot more things about the United States, because there's a lot of things in people to love. And that's why I ultimately choose to be here. And so people are like, wow, it's so great. A dialogue doesn't mean things are bad. Dialogue just means things could be better, which is ultimately what we all want to do.
A more perfect union.
I guess a more perfect union, because perfect is not good enough. It has to be more perfect.
More perfect, yeah.
And then also remember this, right? For those that are legalists, the very act of creating the United States was illegal.
Right.
Because it was a colony. There was an extension of the British colony.
It was a rebellion,
It was a rebellion, right? So it was just, and it had to do much about with taxes and some representation, whatever, but it wasn't that cut and dry, right? So it was illegal at the point. So, I mean, I think that would be my biggest advice. Is just, I think diversity and past makes us stronger. Yeah. Let's make sure we don't repeat the past. We look to the future with that outlook, realizing we were all in some similar boat at the same time. And
excellent, Gregor. Well, thank you so much.
You got it, man. This was fun.
Tremendous conversation.
I appreciate it. Thanks so much.
I hope you enjoyed today's show, and if so, please hit the subscribe button. You can also support us by visiting us online at www.foryoursociety.com. That's F-O-R, yoursociety.com. On the website, you can catch up on the news, listen to podcasts, check out our videos, and of course, donate via Patreon or shop the FY Society store, where you can find whiskey and immigrant swag, as well as other t-shirts that are mostly of a political nature. Our theme music is from J-Funk. You can hear more J-Funk by visiting jfunk801.bandcamp.com. Until next time, this is Matt Hines with For Your Society.